Coming up next on WNIN Lawmakers, we're joined by Indiana State Senator Mark Messmer to discuss how the Indiana General Assembly wound up. WNIN Lawmakers starts right now. Welcome to WNIN Lawmakers. I'm John Gibson, news manager and local host of WNIN FM's Morning Edition. Before we check in with Senator Messmer, here's a report from Indiana Public Broadcasting's Brandon Smith on what happened in the General Assembly this week.
As lawmakers prepared to wrap up the 2023 session, things got off track over concerns about education spending in the state budget. Ultimately, Republicans put an additional $300 million into K-12 spending to quell those concerns. The final version dramatically expands the school voucher program, allowing families of four earning up to $220,000 a year to access taxpayer funds to help pay for private education. Republicans approved legislation that requires school districts to establish a process for parents and community members to file challenges to books they consider inappropriate. Supporters say it's meant to address pornography in schools. Democrats argue it's meant to target books about race and LGBTQ themes. And language added to the budget without public debate or discussion will give statewide elected officials salary increases in 2025 of anywhere from 39% to 60%. The governor's salary, the highest of those officials, would go from about $134,000 a year to nearly $200,000. For Indiana Public Broadcasting, I'm Brandon Smith at the State House.
We're joined now by Indiana State Senator Mark Messmer, who represents Crawford, Du Bois, Gibson, Perry, and Spencer counties. Thank you for joining us, Senator.
Good to be here.
Good to have you via Zoom. We appreciate that. The legislative session has ended. It ended in the early morning hours of Friday. Many things have been passed, and a lot of items are on the governor's desk now. This was a budget year, and a budget was passed. One of the biggest takeaways was an increase in education funding, and a large part of it, as Brandon was just telling us, will go to school vouchers. Senator Messmer, are you happy about that, or are you concerned at all about public money funding private schools?
No, I'm not worried about that whatsoever. School choice has been law in Indiana since 2011. Mm-hmm. The premise that the money follows the child, whether that child is getting a voucher in a private school or goes to a charter school or goes to a public school. The money follows the child no matter where the child goes to school. Mm-hmm. There is probably 3 to 4 times as many students within the public schools that choose to go to a school outside of their district than there are in total of children receiving vouchers. So I know that's the case in my district. And that's the case in pretty well every district across the state. School choice, allows a parent and a child to choose what's best for their child, and the expansion of vouchers. There was more of an increase of students eligible for a voucher through disconnecting what they called the pathways that they had set in place.
Right.
And really, there was about 9 pathways you could use to get a voucher in the past. Really anybody that wanted a voucher, you could apply for a choice scholarship for 1 year, take a partial tuition voucher payment, and then the next year qualify for a full voucher. So, the projected increase of students that they think will be eligible for vouchers now is probably overstated. Due to the fact that anybody that wanted a voucher, you apply for a choice scholarship in year one, whether that's in kindergarten or first grade.
Right.
And then after that, you're eligible for a voucher every year after. And if you have a family member that receives a voucher, you're eligible to receive a voucher. So by raising the income limits, somewhat, there will be some increase, but
right.
Still the majority of people that ever wanted a voucher in the past were eligible through our prior voucher rules. And
Uh-huh.
school choice is wildly popular among the citizens of Indiana, has been since we started it in 2011. We still allocated another $1.5 billion new dollars to traditional K through 12 schools. I checked the runs in my district, and almost an average, they're getting a 6% increase in year one of the biennium, and about a 2 to 2.5% increase in year two. We front loaded that funding increase in year one because of the past year's high inflation impact that everybody's seen in their cost of doing business or cost of operation.
Sure, let's talk
So
about public schools a little bit. You mentioned the 1.5 billion. Is that enough as you see it? Some folks are concerned that we have that there's still not enough funding going to public schools. Your response to that?
Well, $1.5 billion new dollars is pretty significant. A 6% increase, for every, all of my schools in year one, and really, I think about a 5.3 to 5.5% increase to all public schools in year one. Obviously, you could say it's not enough, but then you could say, your logic would be that every dollar of the budget belongs to K through 12 education, and we fund nothing else. We have a lot of other services we have to cover. Medicaid costs went up $2.4 billion in this biennium. It went from 15% of our budget to 18% of our budget, and is outpacing inflation by quite a drastic pace, and outpacing our state revenue growth by a drastic pace. So we have to look at the entire pool of dollars when we fund education or fund anything, and $1.5 billion additional dollars is significant. I got letters of thanks and support from every superintendent in my district, with especially after we caught the mistake in the budget run and the Senate, and saw that it was $300 million short of what we thought it was supposed to be, from Tuesday to Wednesday to Thursday. Brought that to the attention of the House budget negotiators. We agreed to lower we lowered the amount going into the teacher pension fund stabilization by $300 million, and put $300 million more into tuition support when we saw the mistake that had happened during the final hours of budget compilation. And all of my superintendents said, thank you. They greatly appreciate the extra money and catching the error in the final
Now,
budget preparation.
As you see it, does this budget provide enough funding for teachers? Obviously, teacher pay has been quite the issue in recent years. Is this enough as you see it?
We're mandating, but what we passed in last year's the last biennial budget was enough to raise the average teacher pay, the minimum starting pay of $40,000, the average teacher pay of $60,000, and another $1.5 billion. We're also mandating that 65% of all state funding go to support money to teachers, and we're pushing the hand of administrations of school boards to force more of that into the to the pay rate to teachers, because obviously they should be getting they should be the beneficiary of the extra school funding.
All right, well, let's move on to healthcare. A large investment was made toward both public and mental health initiatives. What are your thoughts on that part of the budget? Is there enough funding there?
Well, obviously, at all part of the mix. We prioritized additional mental health funding. We had Senate Bill 1 authored by Senator Kreider to focus more dollars on community mental health programs. We've got $50 million new dollars per year in the biennium to support additional mental health funding, and obviously could we have offered more, of course, but put that in the mix of everything else you're trying to do. $100 million new dollars into mental health is needed, and a great start, between that and House Bill 1006, where we're addressing mental health of folks that are in the legal system, and getting ability to put those folks into mental health programs rather than jail is another huge step. Setting up some regional mental health facilities and programming to where people have better access to mental health. It's an issue that needs attention in our society. I'm sure not only here, I'm sure it's across the country, and putting some prioritization to that in this year's budget with House and Senate measures that we passed. I'm very pleased with the progress we've made.
Well, let's look at other parts of the budget. Are there other highlights that you perhaps liked or disliked? This, of course, as a giant, large budget that was finalized in the early morning hours. What are some of the highlights as you see it, and maybe some of the lowlights, some things you didn't like?
One of the things I'm very pleased to see we're bringing back, this year again in last year's budget, or 2 years ago's budget, we had the Ready Communities funding of $500 million to do economic development programs, and we had the Regional Cities program we did, in years past, and I was not enamored with that because that really was focused on only the large urban areas were beneficiaries of that program. So when we did the Ready program 2 years ago, we made sure that all communities of all sizes were eligible to participate in that. And as we were moving that Ready 2.0 through the process, there was an attempt to require all communities to be part of a regional development authority, which was only 6 or 7 of those across the state. I said, folks, this is going to be, Ready 2.0, or it's going to be Regional Cities 2.0 rather than Ready 2.0. And so we took away the language that was going to require you to be part of a regional development authority to qualify for the grants. I mean, that would have left probably 60 to 70 of our counties out if we would have done it the way it was moving through the system. And got that changed when we had the budget on the Senate side, and I was pleased to get that done. So another $500 million to economic development programs across the state. We also gave the Indiana Economic Development Corporation a $500 million what they call project closing fund, to let them be more competitive with other states when we're trying to attract companies to Indiana.
Sure. And
when that bill was on the Senate side, I was able to get a commitment that communities of less than 50,000 will have to receive. It was 10% when it left the Senate. They made it 5% during negotiations with the House. But that did stay in it. So there'll be $25 million that'll go to small communities across the state with populations of less than 50,000. Since we eliminated what they called the Dino building tax credit probably 6 years ago and went to just a economic development, all lumped into one redevelopment tax credit program. And since that time, IEDC has allocated no dollars to any small county across Indiana. And so getting a commitment, a $5 billion project in Marion County is a big deal. A $50 million project in Spencer County is a big deal.
And as we mentioned at the top, you cover a lot of rural and smaller counties.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's important for your constituents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The vast majority of counties are small counties across the state. I mean, I represent all small counties. I don't have a county over 50,000 in the 6 counties that I cover. And so making sure that the state is given a little bit of priority to the rural communities, I saw that as a big win for the small communities across the state.
Sure. Anything else in the budget that perhaps you weren't satisfied with? Something that maybe you hope to come back and address next year?
I mean, as a whole, is there always things? Yep, I had a project at the Purdue Diagnostic Lab up near Patoka Lake that takes care of a lot of the bird flu and animal health diagnostic testing in Southern Indiana. They were looking for some money to replace some equipment in their building that it is sorely outdated, and that didn't make it. So I was not pleased with that. But that was really a small item. I mean, I'm sure Purdue could probably allocate some capital without the line item if it's absolutely necessary.
Sure.
But as a whole, I was pretty pleased with the overall budget.
Okay.
Hard not to be.
Right. Okay, well, let's move on to Senate Bill 480. It was signed by the governor. It prohibits physicians from providing or aiding in the treatment of transgender youth. Why did you support that measure?
Well, I don't know if your explanation of that is exactly correct. Children, children that are minors or people under 18 that are minors can receive counseling for transgender, mental health issues, for helping them cope with the transgender dysphoria that they're going through, but to allow minors to get permanent, life-altering, unproven surgery to go through sex change operations prior to being 18, or to have drugs that stop their puberty, or puberty blockers or hormones are unproven, and countries that have done research on that, over a lot longer range of time, over a lot larger group of patients, the best mental health outcome for and physical outcome for those children many times is to let them get to adulthood, get through puberty, and then decide to make that transition. But the surgeries are permanent, and most of the drugs are permanent changes to their body. And if you just let them go through normal adulthood transition, many times in the countries that have analyzed this for a lot longer than we have said that the best outcome is wait to adulthood to make that decision, and many times they don't decide to get surgeries.
All right, well, let's move on to another issue that raised a lot of concerns. It's a so-called book ban, and ended up being applicable only in school libraries. What are your thoughts on restricting access to books, possibly at times maybe based on just one parent or one group of parents? What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that bill does not ban any books. It allows a process if there's a pornographic material in a school library, or content that would be deemed harmful to a minor under current statutes. All it does, it sets up a process for a parent to go to the school board and make their request that the item be removed. The school board has the option to make that choice to take it out or not. If they don't take the content out of the library, it takes away the educational exemption for protection of the school or the teacher or the librarian. Currently, they can say any pornographic material is educational, and I have seen some of the books in some of our school libraries in Indiana, and they are cartoonistic versions of pornography that don't belong in any school library. I went to our local library and checked out a book called Tricks, and it's not magic tricks. It's a book of tricks by a prostitute, written in poetic form that would repulse anybody who read it. And it was an AR 3.8 book, not appropriate for any third or fourth grader, not appropriate for any school library. And those books would be deemed content harmful to a minor because they don't meet the current. If you or I handed this material out to somebody, we could be charged. If it's in a school library.
This book was in a school library, is that right? You said this was in a school library, an elementary school?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
So it just sets up a process to appeal to the school board to get it out. And if they don't take it out, they no longer have an educational exemption to say anything pornographic or anything that if you or I gave it to a minor, we could easily be charged with content harmful to a minor or distribution of obscene material.
Can you tell us what school that library book was in? Do you recall?
Here in Jasper.
I'm sorry?
In Jasper.
Okay, the Jasper Elementary School? Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on to another bill that, of course, has gotten lots of attention. Indiana's version of what you might call a Don't Say Gay bill. It doesn't allow any discussion of human sexuality from kindergarten to third grade. Do you have any concerns about that, how that might be applied? For example, if a teacher is pregnant, can she even discuss it with students? What are your thoughts on that?
If they ask her a question, she can answer it. They just don't need to be teaching kids about masturbation in kindergarten, first, second, or third grade.
Mm-hmm. Is that your?
All it says you can't teach sex education to kids in kindergarten, first, second, or third grade. They don't even have the ability to understand what you or I are talking about. We don't need to be teaching kids, and the tag of "No, don't say gay" is another total misrepresentation of what the bill does.
So, in other words, but obviously there can't be something about homosexuality as well in first, second, third. Is that
They don't even understand what homosexuality is.
Mm-hmm.
So no, they don't need to be taught about it.
All right. Well, let's move on to a statewide energy plan that the government has signed. It passed the General Assembly almost unanimously. So, what are some of the items in that plan? Some things that you like in terms of the statewide energy plan?
Well, we had several energy bills we passed this year. I had one in particular, the Senate Bill 390, that would allow communities that adopt the statewide renewable solar and wind siting standards that we passed last year. If they adopt those standards, they're eligible to apply to the Indiana Department of Energy Development for a grant of $1 per megawatt hour for their projects, the wind and solar projects in their communities, if they've adopted the statewide wind and solar standards. So it's a good way to incentivize consistency in our renewable standards across the state, and was very pleased to author that bill. Hopefully we'll get we've got one county that's adopted the standards, and hopefully, and several that were considering it, waiting to see if the incentives were adopted this year. So the Indiana Office of Energy Development will have to apply for some federal grants to fund it. But Brian Hadley, who heads up that division, said he was quite confident there would be some federal Department of Energy grants that he could apply to fund it, and look forward to incentivizing communities to adopt consistency across the state. We also did some changing to our modular nuclear energy program that we passed last year. We did some updates to the size of the modular reactors that the IURC can approve. So no companies have moved forward on that yet, but there's some interest in that as well.
And what exactly would that what would that provide?
Last year, we allowed the IURC to approve the use of modular nuclear reactors for future energy development in the state, and we raised the size of the reactor, modular reactor that could be in a single modular reactor.
I see. So in other words, companies could build larger reactors than before.
Yeah, but they're the same type of modular nuclear reactors that we've been using on submarines and surface vessels in the Navy, for decades. They're small, they're self-contained, and then you would just bank multiple of those in a location if you needed more capacity.
All right, let's talk a little bit. We've got just a few minutes left here about floodplain maps. The Indiana Department of Natural Resources created maps that are more restrictive than FEMA's. The bill originally allowed using FEMA's maps. It's been amended to allow owners to use the DNR maps or have their own survey done. It passed in a bipartisan manner. What are your thoughts on those floodplain maps?
Well, the FEMA maps are much more accurate maps. The DNR maps, they admitted they were aerial maps that they did that were fraught with flaws as they flew over areas and did aerial surveys. Depending on the moisture content in the soil, sometimes they got false readings on what floodplain elevations would be. People that have never in 100 plus years of history on their own property, the DNR maps that they came out with a couple years ago showed them to be in violation of what they deem to be floodplain areas. So the FEMA maps are what control if you're going to get flood insurance. That's the maps that you need to follow. If you've got property in a floodplain or floodway. So I mean, it really puts it back into the FEMA map designation, but what would allow some and if you have an appeal on a FEMA map, the process to get a clarification on that is pretty quick. So at this point, while we continue to study the accuracy of the maps that the DNR tried to develop, those maps ended up being enormously restrictive on property owners and on places that had no history of floods, going back hundreds of years.
Yeah. Quickly, well, obviously the nation continues to endure mass shootings. Is there anything you think the state legislature can do to help prevent these tragedies?
Well, we already have a pretty robust red flag law in Indiana, and it's really sad when people know they've got a family member, and it happened in the FedEx shooting scenario a couple years ago, where the family even turned the person in that did the shooting to the prosecutor, and the person had a history and would have had to comply to the red flag laws and have his gun confiscated. I mean, at some point, it just takes the laws that are on the books being enacted and being followed through with. And for heaven's sake, if you've got a family member, a friend, a neighbor, that is in a poor mental health state, and hopefully some of these issues that we're working on to improve access to mental health for folks. I mean, many more times than not, it's somebody with a mental health disorder. The person in Louisville a couple weeks ago, the mother had there was just an article today in the news that she knew he was going through a mental health crisis, thought it was under control, had appointments scheduled with a psychologist, and still things snap. But in that case, I'm not sure if the person actually lived in Kentucky or Indiana. He was from Indiana, but I think was living in Kentucky.
Okay.
I don't know if they have red flag laws.
Sure. We will have to leave it there, Senator. That's Senator Messmer. Thank you so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for joining us on the Zoom. And we will return next week for a final look at the legislative session. Our scheduled guests are Indiana State Senator Vanita Becker and Indiana State Representative Ryan Hatfield. I'm John Gibson of WNIN FM. Thanks for watching WNIN Lawmakers.